About 6 years ago, I was 21 years old, home from college for the summer, and living with my parents. This was deep Texas suburbia, where every house looked nearly identical. Cookie-cutter homes built by the same developer. Every few blocks, there was either a small park or a community pool. Once a year, the neighborhood held an event called Rock the Park. I never knew who exactly organized it, but it always drew a crowd. An older local band would bring their instruments and play cover songs, Aerosmith, the Eagles, classics like that. Families brought lawn chairs. Kids ran around the playground, and the pool stayed open late. The music echoed through the park, just loud enough to hear from every corner without being overwhelming. That particular night, my parents had gone out to dinner. So with the brilliant mind of 21-year-old, I poured vodka into a Coca-Cola bottle, tucked it under my arm, and walked the block up to the park. By the time I got there, I had down a good amount of it. I was feeling loose, maybe too loose. I walked right up to the bench closest to the stage and sat down. There was already a man sitting at the far end of the bench, but I didn't pay him much attention at first. There were a good 4 feet between us. It didn't take long before he struck up a conversation. He had a sharp, bony face and looked to be in his early 30s. He greeted me politely enough. "Hello, how are you?" But something about his demeanor felt off. I responded in kind, but I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly, hoping he'd get the hint that I wasn't interested in chatting. But he kept going. He asked if I was having a good time. Thanks to the vodka, I was honest and said, "Of course I am." I shook my Coke bottle absent-mindedly, and the little bit left fizzed inside. That seemed to encourage him. As he talked, he began to shift closer. I stayed planted on the far edge of the bench, but inch by inch, he reduced the gap. He asked if I lived nearby. I said, "Yeah, don't worry," I walked. I thought he was asking because he didn't want me driving drunk. But his next question threw me off. He asked for my number. That was the first moment the unease hit me in full. I was buzzed, alone, and suddenly very aware of how vulnerable I was. I told him I didn't know him well enough. He smiled and said, "Well, get to know me." I made an excuse about needing to step away. I told him the music was too loud and I had to make a phone call. I wandered around the playground, weaving behind climbing walls and tubes, making sure he couldn't see me directly. Still, I had the gnawing sense that he was watching where I went. I started texting friends from college, telling them about the situation and asking for advice. Most of them told me to leave right away, but I didn't want them following me home. Then I tried my high school friends, hoping some of them were also home for the summer. Luckily, one was. She said she could come pick me up, but it would take 20 to 30 minutes. I tried to stay calm. I moved to a different part of the playground and sat on swings. From there, I could still see the stage. For a moment, I thought maybe he had forgotten me. But then, he appeared again. He took the swing right beside me. "So," he said, leaning closer, "what do you want to know about me? What do you need to know?" I forced a smile and replied, "Actually, I'm really tired. I'm probably going to go home soon. I just want to enjoy the music a little longer without talking." That's when he became insistent. He told me he should walk me home. At first, it sounded like a suggestion, but the more I refused, the more forceful he got. He kept repeating it, almost demanding. Panic crept in. My parents wouldn't be home for hours. If I let him follow me, he'd know where I lived, and I'd be trapped alone. I lied and pointed in the opposite direction of my actual house. He got up, took a few steps that way, then turned back, waiting for me to follow. I stayed put. I told him I wasn't ready to go yet, but I knew in that moment, if I walked home, he would come with me whether I wanted him to or not. He lingered near me for about 10 more minutes until, finally, I spotted my friend's car pulling up. Relief washed over me. I jumped to my feet and waved, calling, "That's my friend." I hurried toward her car. She got out, walking toward me with concern. I rushed over and whispered, "We need to go right now." But it was too late. He had followed me. He touched my shoulder and said, "Hey, wait. You promised to give me your number." I hadn't promised him anything, but feeling cornered, I rattled off a fake number, hoping it would satisfy him. He immediately dialed it, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. My friend, quick thinking, said loudly, "Didn't your phone die earlier?" I picked up on it and nodded. "Oh yeah, I forgot. I'll text you later, man." Then I gave a little wave and speed walked with her back to the car. He didn't follow, but he stood there, watching us as we drove away. I told my friend to take the long route in the opposite direction of my house, just in case. That night stuck with me. Nothing happened physically, but the threat hung heavy in the air. And it was the first time I truly understood how quickly an innocent setting could turn dangerous. Back in mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while serving in the Army Reserves. My position was as a spotter. That meant I lived in a tall fire tower planted in the middle of a national park. My job was simple, but heavy with responsibility. Spend hours looking through binoculars, scanning the endless forest for the first hints of smoke, flames, or anything that could signal danger. The nearest fellow spotter was about 5 miles away. Days were long, but simple. I'd walk the perimeter around the tower, check for anyone lighting illegal fires, watch for wildlife, and keep an eye out for bears or wolves. Our shifts rotated weekly, 1 week on duty, 1 week off. So during that week, the tower became home. We cooked there, we slept there, and though there were basic facilities nearby, it often felt like isolation in its purest form. One afternoon, while walking one of the trails, I stumbled across an illegal bear trap. It was a brutal-looking thing. I knew poachers set them from time to time, even though it carried heavy fines and possible jail time. Carefully, I disarmed the trap, then carried it with me, planning to drop it off at the ranger station on my next supply, running my Jeep. Later that day, I heard rifle shots in the distance. That sound made my skin crawl. I hurried back to the tower. Each tower had been outfitted with a rifle after a spotter had been mauled by a grizzly only months earlier. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the treeline, but saw nothing. I radioed my co-worker, Ben, who was manning the next tower. Ben was older, experienced, and steady. He told me he hadn't heard the shots, but had found a few traps himself. That night, after a lonely dinner of beans and toast, I sat down to write a letter to my fiancée back home. That's when I heard it, the low rumble of a truck engine. I figured maybe it was Ben. Sometimes he'd drive over, and we'd share a soda, pass some time, and talk about nothing. But when I stepped outside, I saw it wasn't him. A truck pulled up near the base of the tower, and 4 men climbed out. Each carried rifles. One leaned against the truck casually, while the others pulled out steel traps and began setting them in the dark. My stomach tightened. I was only 21 back then, a farmer's son from rural Virginia. I'd already been on one deployment, but in truth, I was naive. Instead of calling the Rangers immediately, I thought maybe I could reason with them. I grabbed a rifle from the tower and my lantern, then descended the long staircase into the night. My hands were sweaty on the rifle stock. I barely managed to get the words out. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Before rough hands slammed into me. I stumbled, dropping the lantern. It shattered on the ground. A boot kicked my rifle out of reach. The air left my chest when another man drove his foot into my stomach. I collapsed, gasping for air, clutching at the dirt. 2 of them yanked me upright and shoved me into the woods. We marched in silence. It felt like miles, though in reality it was maybe 1. But something was wrong. The forest was silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of branches. Only the crunch of boots on leaves. They forced me to my knees. Hot tears welled in my eyes. I thought of my parents, my little brother and sister, and the woman waiting for me back home. I heard the metallic rack of a rifle being loaded. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. I shut my eyes and prayed. Then, the night split open. Sirens wailed through the trees. Headlights cut across the darkness. It was the forest rangers, with Ben right behind them in his pickup. The poachers scattered, but they didn't get far. Rangers swarmed and took them down. I was shaking too hard to move until Ben reached me. He didn't scold me for not following procedure. He just put a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "That was close, kid." I didn't last much longer in the job. A few months later, I transferred closer to home. I never encountered poachers again during my time as a spotter, but the memory of that night never faded. Ben and I stayed in touch for a while. I sent him an invitation to my wedding, then a photo of my firstborn son in '97. But like many friendships, time eventually pulled us apart. Years later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked him up. He would have been about 75. I found his obituary. He had passed away a few years earlier. I sat there staring at the screen, and I thought back to that night in the forest. If it hadn't been for him, I might never have made it home. This happened about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. At the time, I had just started dating my boyfriend. He lived a few towns away, so I would often drive back and forth late at night. One particular night, I had fallen asleep at his house while watching a movie. By the time I woke up and left, it was close to 3 in the morning. I was exhausted. I knew the route to the parkway well enough, but there was one section of town I wasn't very familiar with. To get onto the entrance ramp, you had to cut through a park. That part of the drive was dark. There were almost no street lights, and while houses weren't far away, none of them were visible from the road. I turned onto that stretch and immediately noticed a golden sedan stopped in the middle of the road. It was positioned in such a way that no matter which direction you came from, you would have to squeeze to get around it. For some context, I'm small. At that time, maybe 100 pounds at most and only 5 feet tall. Alone, young, tired, and it was 3 a.m. I slowed down, trying to see if there were headlights coming from the opposite direction so I could carefully pull around. But before I could move, a tall man suddenly ran around from the front of the stopped car. He waved his arms at me, trying to get my attention. Every instinct in me screamed, "Don't stop." He didn't look frightened. He didn't look injured. He didn't even look particularly scary. But something about the situation set off every alarm in my head. I inched forward, trying to edge around him, but he moved directly in front of my car, blocking me. My heart jumped. I quickly reached over and locked my doors. That became a habit I've kept ever since. He started talking, walking closer, leaning down toward my window. I couldn't hear him clearly. My hearing isn't great, but he was close enough that I could read his lips. He was saying he needed help. He wanted my cell phone to call somebody. I shook my head. I told him no. He pressed his hand against my window. "Please," he mouthed, but my gut told me the truth. This wasn't about a phone. Something was very, very wrong. I shook my head again, said no, and pressed the gas. I didn't care if I ran over his foot. I was leaving. I swerved into the oncoming lane to get around his car. My headlights caught his face in the dark, and the look of anger twisted across it as I drove past. I glanced into my rearview mirror and saw him standing there in the middle of the road, glaring after me. Then, as my headlights swept further, I saw them. 3 men climbing out of the bushes by the side of the road. They were all dressed the same. Black t-shirts, jeans, each one staring at me with cold, hostile eyes. My stomach dropped. If I had stopped, if I had rolled down my window, I don't know what would have happened. I slammed the gas pedal and tore up the road, merging onto the parkway. My whole body was shaking. My hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. I grabbed my phone and called the police as soon as I could, but I was bounced between departments. Nobody knew whether it fell under county jurisdiction or highway patrol. The entrance was right on the border. Nobody seemed eager to take the case. Finally, an officer told me they'd send a car to check it out. I asked him to call me back and let me know if they found anything, since I drove that way often. He did. He told me by the time they got there, both the men and the car were gone. But not even 5 minutes later, another woman called in. She described the exact same thing. A car blocking the road, a man asking for help, more men waiting in the dark. Same location, same setup. The police advised me never to drive through the park at night again. I never did. When I told my parents, my mom cried and my dad was furious. But they were both proud of me for trusting my instincts and not stopping. From that night on, we made a new rule for the whole family, including my boyfriend. Anytime one of us was heading home late at night, we had to text somebody first, just so someone always knew where we were.